In today's video, I will teach you everything you need to know in order for you to play a game of chess. How is the board set up? How do the pieces move? How do you actually win a game of chess? This is the beginning of a new series on my channel where I'll cover everything you need to know in order for you to get to 2000 ELO on chess.com. I've been able to get to 2000 ELO on chess.com in about 5 years. Before 2021, I only knew how the pieces move, and I've reached 2100 ELO last week. So if you like these kinds of videos, please consider subscribing, and without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with the absolute basics. I have a chessboard set up next to me right now, which consists of 64 squares, 32 light squares and 32 dark squares. There are 8 rows and 8 columns. And before you begin a game, you should set up the board exactly like it is set up next to me right now, with all of the pieces on the exact same squares. There are 8 pawns, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, 2 knights, a queen and a king. And we have rows and we have columns. We call them ranks and we call them files. So we have an A file, a B file and a C file, a first rank, a second rank and a third rank. Every letter corresponds with a file and every number corresponds with a rank. And as you can see, there is a black and a white side. You start off with white, you have an advantage because you are always the one that moves first. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at how every individual piece moves up on the chessboard, and we're going to look at the different strengths that every chess piece has. Let's begin with the most seen chess piece on the board, the pawn. The pawn is the least valuable and also the most seen piece on the board. So in chess, obviously chess is a turn-based game. So that means whenever I make a move, afterwards it is the turn of black to make a move, and so on. And of course, every piece has its own way of moving around the board in chess. The pawn can move always one square up the board. That is how it used to move. So let's say we go a3, and then he goes d6, and then I go e4, and he goes d5, etc. However, there is one very important thing you have to notice is that in the beginning of a chess game, when the pawns are all still on the second row and on the 7th row, we are able to move it 2 squares up the board instead of 1. So I am able to play e2 to e4 here. Also notice how I sometimes will mention the notation of the chessboard. So I will say e4 and I will say something like d5. For now, you don't have to pay too much attention on that. We will get into notation later, but as you can see, there's an E here on the board and there's an 4 here on the board and a 2. So we will get into that later, but for now, sometimes I will just drop and mention the E4 square, for example, like I did just now. So, of course, like I mentioned in the beginning of the game, when they're still on the second rank, you are able to go to e4 with the pawn moving 2 squares up the board. The same is possible for black. So let's say black plays d5 here. Now we have a position where the pawns are looking at each other diagonally. And a very important thing you have to know about chess as well is that every piece is able to capture another piece. One of the things you can do in chess is take other people's pieces off the board by attacking them. Pawns move up the board one step at a time, of course just very simple. However, they take and they attack the opponent diagonally. So they will take on the d5 and the f5 square right now for white. So in this position I am able to take the pawn like this. Now, of course, black has no more pieces, so of course this is not a legitimate position. There's also no kings on the board, so this won't work. However, in this position, let's assume it is all valid and all true. I'm able, and like I just mentioned, to take the pawn. And now after taking the pawn, I'm able to walk my pawn up the board, all the way up until the end of the board. And at the end of the board, the pawn has one very nice thing you will probably already know, which is promotion. So a pawn, if it reaches the other side of the board, is able to turn into another piece, which is essentially what promotion is. And very important to know about this is that pawn can never stay a pawn. It has to promote into another piece. It can promote into a bishop, a knight, a rook or a queen, but not a king. And afterwards, it is just as valuable as the other pieces you have on the board. So another piece, another bishop or another knight or another rook or another queen, and you'll just have another piece, which is very, very important about pawns and also very strong. You will learn about that much more later. So let's go on to the next piece. So the second piece I wanted to cover with you is the bishop. The bishop, unlike the pawn, can move all the way to the other side of the board instead of just 1 or 2 squares at a time. And it can only move diagonally. So I'm loaded up in chess.com here, and when I click this piece, you will be able to see all of the places where this bishop can go. So here you can see that this bishop can cover all of these squares right now, and on this move and this move only, I'm able to move this bishop all the way to, let's say, h6 for example. So that is a very important thing to know, and also, like I mentioned, if you go from here you will see the same squares, but then of course the possibilities the bishop has in this particular situation. Let's move the bishop back. One more very important thing you will know about the bishop is the bishops are always stronger on long diagonals. So let's say I put my bishop here. Of course this is a very short diagonal, it only covers 3 squares, but if I place the bishop on b2, it will cover all of these squares. So the more squares the bishop covers, the stronger it is. One more thing about bishops, just like pawns, they capture diagonally. So let's say black moves his bishop to f6 right now. I'm able to simply capture this with my bishop as white, and now I've captured the bishop of the opponent. So the next piece I wanted to show you is the knight. The knight is one of the most unpredictable pieces in a chess game. And I've got the board here next to me once more, and if I click this knight you will see all of the squares that this knight is able to go to right now. The knight has a very specific way of moving around the board. One of the easiest ways to remember how they move is they move in L shapes. So let's say this is the letter L, of course. Now this knight can go to c4 from d2. So this is a valid move for the knight. Another very important thing you have to notice is that, let's say there are a bunch of pawns here. The knight is actually the only piece on a chessboard which is able to jump over other pieces. So a knight is able to go to e4 right now. However, if this knight were a bishop, I'm not able to move to b4 or f4 right now. So that is very important to realize about the knight. Another very important thing you need to realize about knights is that they take also in knight shapes, of course. So this piece, unlike a pawn, takes the same way as it moves, just like the bishop. So let's say I go to c4 right now, and then to e5. Now I'm able to capture the knight on d7. And that is all you have to know about the knight. So the next piece is the rook. The rook moves exactly opposite of the bishop. The bishop moves only diagonally, but the rook only moves vertically and horizontally. So in this position, if I click the rook here, you will see that the rook is able to go all the way up to this side of the board, all the way back, and all the way to the side. And also, rooks capture the exact same way they move, just like any other piece except for the pawn. So if I go to f1 with my rook here, black is able to capture it. So now I'm going to show you the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. The queen has the power of a bishop and a rook combined. It can move both horizontally and vertically, as well as diagonally. So right now I've got the board set up here in front of me right now, of course, and now if I click this piece you will see once more all of the squares that the queen covers. And as you can see, the queen covers diagonal squares like this, but also horizontal and vertical squares like this. Queens capture just like any other piece the same way they move. So if I move my queen to d3 for example, this queen will be able to capture me. Which is of course very important to know, that there's also a danger for queens if you move them on the same diagonal. So if I move to g4 with my queen, the black queen is also able to capture me. A very important thing about queens is that you often don't want to move them too early in a chess game because they are very prone to be attacked. The last piece we're going to take a look at is the king. The king is a unique piece because it moves just like a queen in every direction, but it moves only one step at a time, just like a pawn. So if I click on this piece here once more, you will see that it moves in every single direction, but only one square at a time. What makes the king so unique is the fact that it needs to be protected. If the king is taken, the game actually ends. And that brings me to the next part of this video, where I will explain to you how to win a chess game. So that brings me to the next part I wanted to show you. How do you actually win a game of chess? There are a few different ways in order for you to win a game of chess. We're going to focus on the most important one right now. So the most important way to win a chess game is checkmate. If you've ever played chess in your life before, you've probably heard of the term checkmate before. I've got the board set up in front of me right now, and as you can see, this is a position where white is going to be able to play right now. And like we just mentioned, the rook is able to move both horizontally as well as vertically all the way across the board. So if I am playing with white right now, I'm able to give this check, which is rook c8. And check means essentially you are attacking the enemy king, but it isn't quite checkmate yet. Checkmate occurs when you are both attacking the king and it also has no more options to get out of the attack. So in this position I can give a check. And there are a few different ways in order for you to get out of check. One of the ways is to capture the piece that is giving a check. The second way is to get to walk away with your king. And the third way is to intervene or block the check. And let's go ahead and take this position right now, for example, which is essentially exactly the same position we just showed. However, there's one very important difference. Now if I go to rook c8, it is a check. But now my piece can be taken by the enemy, which is exactly what I just mentioned. Now the check is no longer occurring because obviously the attack that I've just given, it can simply be countered by taking the piece that I've attacked with. So that is one way to get out of check. Another way to get out of check is by moving your king. So this is once more the almost the same position as I just shown. There's only one very important detail here, that the pawn is not on h7 but it is on h6. So now if I give the check, he can actually just step away with his king. And if he steps away with his king, he is completely fine. There's no more attack and it's no longer a check and it's also not a checkmate. In this position, however, he cannot move his king and he cannot take the piece that I've attacked with. He can only do one thing, which is the last way to get out of check. It's to block or intervene with another piece. So he can go rook e8 and now he's essentially stopped the check. However, we have one very deadly attack here, which is simply to take the rook. And now we can take the rook. The rook was not defended, so it is a free piece. And now, as you can see, it is actually a checkmate, because he cannot take the piece that I've attacked with. He cannot move his king because the pawns are all on the wrong squares. And he cannot block the check anymore. So this essentially means it is a checkmate. So the next thing I wanted to teach you is actually a rule that is not as commonly known as checkmate. It is called stalemate. And stalemate is a draw, where checkmate is a win. So stalemate happens when the king of the enemy is not in check, but it is also not able to move anymore. So I have the position set up at the left of me, of course, right now once more. And in this position, let's assume white is the one that is able to move. So here I am very close with my queen to the enemy king, which means that the enemy king only has one square and it's now my turn to move. So of course, all of these squares, the king cannot go. Let's say if it was black's turn here, the king couldn't go to any of the red marked squares I've highlighted right now next to me. So one of the ways that you can actually cause a stalemate here is by either going rook g1. And as you can see, the game immediately mentions that it is a draw. And the reason this is a draw is because, like I just showed you, these squares are all covered by the enemy queen. So the white queen, of course. And this square is now covered by the rook. So this means that the enemy's king, the black king, has simply nowhere to go. It cannot go anywhere. Which means that the game is not won by white, because it is not a check. You're not attacking the king. It is actually a draw, because you have caused a situation in which the enemy's king cannot move, but you're also not attacking it. So this is a way to draw the game even though you are completely winning. And the same happens when you go to b6 with your rook, which also covers this square. And it means that this is a draw as well. So the last thing I wanted to show you in this video is how do you actually determine if a certain trade of pieces is good for you. So let's say you're attacking a piece of the enemy and he takes back with another piece. How do you know if trading those two pieces is good or bad? We do this by giving every piece a value. So I've got all of the pieces set up in front of me right now, as you can see, and we're gonna just go from left to right and determine how strong a certain piece is. So like I've mentioned in this video before, the pawn is obviously the most seen and also the least valuable piece in the chess game. It is worth 1 point. We have the bishop next to it. The bishop is worth 3 points. Then we have the knight. The knight is also worth 3 points. We have a rook, which is worth 5 points. And then we have a queen, which is worth 9 points. The last one is a very difficult one to determine, because obviously if the king is captured, the game is over. So we generally say the king doesn't really have a value. It simply means that if this piece has been attacked and it cannot move, like we've mentioned, the game is over. It's checkmate. So one of the very important nuances you have to know about this is that obviously the value of a piece determines on the position of the board. If you get better at chess, the better you get, the more you'll realize that this system of points doesn't always apply. It means that sometimes if you have a bishop that is on a bad diagonal or a knight that is restricted by a lot of pawns, it means that it is not essentially the same 3 points as it is at the start of a chess game. So that's the ending of this video. If you were a complete beginner at the start of this video, you now know how the chess pieces move and you also know how to win the game. This series will cover everything from the very basics until you are able to reach 2000 ELO in Rapid on chess.com. So please consider leaving a like and subscribe if you want to improve more in chess.